Hello. Continuing on from the previous lecture. This shows an example of address request and address reply as continuation from our previous lecture. XAUTH allows IPsec IKE CFG protocol to support extended authentication mechanisms like two-factor authentication, challenge and response, and other remote access authentication methods. In order to ensure interoperability with future and past implementations of XAUTH, a vendor ID was introduced. The vendor ID payload is sent during the Phase 1 exchange. The vendor ID will be the RFC name that will be MD5 hashed. You would be able to see the name in a Wireshark packet capture. For example, the name here is for draft of IKE CFG auth version 6. It's a hash of that name. If an IKE gateway receives this vendor ID, it can assume that the peer also has implemented this protocol, and therefore the peer is a mutually consenting party. Both sides would have to support the vendor ID. Extended authentication allows an edge device to request extended authentication from an IPsec host. It will force the host to respond with its extended authentication credentials. The edge device will then respond with a failed or passed message. When the edge device requests extended authentication, it will specify the type of extra authentication and any parameters required for it. These parameters are the attributes that are required for authentication. The extended authentication transaction is terminated either when the edge device starts a set/acknowledgement exchange, which includes an XAUTH status attribute, or when the remote device sends an XAUTH status attribute in a reply message. A remote device, or client, cannot set XAUTH status to anything but fail. The edge device can request multiple different authentication transactions within one extended authentication transaction. This is done by having multiple request/reply pairs, initiated by the edge device, before the transaction is completed. Each request/reply pair can have a different value for the XAUTH type. XAUTH can also periodically authenticate the user during the lifetime of a security association. If the IPsec host does not have support for the authentication method requested by the edge device, then it would send back a reply with the XAUTH status attribute set to fail. This will result in a failed authentication, but the authentication transaction would be completed. The extended authentication mechanism does not affect the nature of the Phase 1 authentication mechanism in any way. Both peers must authenticate each other via the authentication methods described in IKE, like pre-shared key for example. The XAUTH method provides unidirectional authentication only, meaning that only one device is authenticated using both IKE authentication methods and extended authentication. Simple authentication is used when a username and password are required for authentication. We see here the edge device sends a request demanding the username and password. The host responds with its username and password in return in a reply message. The edge IKE gateway sends a status of OK indicating a past authentication. The final message is an empty acknowledgement message from the connecting client. The challenge response method further expands the conversation with a message requesting a PIN, as well as a username and password, as seen here. The client would provide the challenge response. This could be an RSA token device or any other multi-factor authentication device. The server would validate, and if the second factor passes would send a status OK message. This can also be combined into one request. For example, here, the IKE gateway asks for a username along with a password concatenated with a PIN. This is also another approach that gets commonly used. The XAUTH could also be expanded to utilize two levels of authentication, for example an RSA token and a PIN sent to an SMS device. A one-time password is also another approach used where the user is prompted with a challenge. They then enter this challenge into their application. An example of a vendor solution is RSA software, which utilizes this approach. The application would return the challenge response which is entered into the login prompt. If the challenge matches the expected return, the user is allowed connectivity. Some situations may occur where the edge device has already authenticated the host and no new authentication is required. This may happen when either the host or the edge device must rekey an existing Phase 1 SA. One method that allows re-authentication is to use the same ID from the Phase 1 negotiation which is available in main mode and aggressive mode, but only if the ID is unique to the user and cannot be forged. Commonly this is doable using an IP address ID. This concept is referred to as ID checking. The XAUTH protocol uses the mechanisms utilized in IKE config to accomplish its authentication transaction. All ISA-CAMP config messages in an extended authentication transaction contains the same ISA-CAMP transaction identifier. The authentication is done after a Phase 1 exchange has been completed and before any other exchange with the exception of information mode exchanges. If the extended authentication fails, then Phase 1 SA will be immediately deleted. The edge device can retry an extended authentication request if the user failed to be authenticated but will do so in the same ISA-CAMP config transaction. It will send the set message with a fail until the user provide the correct credentials and gets authenticated. Usually there are a number of attempts allowed for the host, and if the number of attempts is exceeded, the IKE gateway terminates the connection. Extended authentication can be initiated by the edge device at any time after the initial authentication exchange. For example, Radius servers may specify that a user only be authenticated for a certain time period. Once that time period has elapsed, the edge device may request a new extended authentication exchange. If the extended authentication exchange fails, the edge device will tear down all Phase 1 and Phase 2 SAs associated with this user. This slide shows the attributes that is used in the IKE config message. The message would be of type request with attributes as listed here. For example, if the attribute is 16520, this is a basic authentication. Like we have seen, the message types are either request/reply or set/acknowledge. Hopefully you enjoyed this lecture. In the next lecture we will look at an example. See you in the next lecture.